Hello! This is probably the last Socialism 101 video for a while. Today, we'll discuss one of the many, and my personal favorite, inherent contradiction within capitalism that Marx titled The Tendency for the Rate of Profit to Fall. Side note, this idea, like many of Marx's, didn't originate with him. Classical economists such as Smith and Ricardo both originated similar ideas that Marx built upon. With that said, though, what is Marx talking about exactly? Well, right before this, we need to define a few things so it's easier to understand. Constant capital is the sum total of the value of the means of production, factories, machines, raw materials, fuel, electric power, and other necessary products and material inputs used up in the production process. Variable capital is the value of the human labor power purchased by the capitalists, by hiring workers, and employed by them in the production process. You can think of it more simply as constant capital is the stuff you need to make commodities, meanwhile variable capital is the human input, meaning labor. Surplus value, which we covered in an earlier video, is the value produced by workers in a capitalist system of production, which is over and above that which goes to pay their wages, and the costs of raw materials, overhead, and other expenses required to keep the production process going. It is, for simplicity's sake, the prime source of profit. With all that out of the way, what is the tendency for the rate of profit to fall that Marx mentions in Volume 1 and Volume 3 of Capital? Let's outline the argument. Firstly, what is the rate of profit? Very simply, it's the ratio of surplus value produced by workers over the amount of capital invested. The driving force of capitalism is the search for more and more surplus value, the major source of profit, as previously mentioned. In early capitalism, this was the search for so-called absolute surplus value, meaning increasing surplus value by, for example, increasing how much workers worked while keeping wages constant, because the more hours you work above what it takes to make your wage, the more surplus value and hence profit the capitalists can extract from you. Later capitalists attempted to increase, by contrast, relative surplus value. This means any and all methods to produce faster, more efficiently, and with less materials, rather than increasing the work week, which all result in higher profits. Why do they do this? Because not only is there a definite upper limit for how much a person can work in a day, but also because the working class itself becomes radical and fights for basic rights such as shorter work weeks, weekends, holidays, etc., etc. This drive to increase relative surplus value actually is a merit of capitalism compared to earlier modes of production, as the drive for further profits pushes capitalists to innovate faster methods of production and compete with each other as much as possible in order to reduce production prices and to increase profits. But here's the paradox. This competition between capitalists leads to the reduction of the cost of production, most commonly through labor-saving technical progress. This means they increasingly replace labor inputs with non-labor inputs to production, replacing people with machinery, automation. Of course, this also has the added benefit of a more docile working condition as machines don't strike, they don't get sick, and they don't unionize. This results in a massive increase in productivity, of course, and extraction of higher amounts of relative surplus value. This also, however, reduces the total amount of workers, the fundamental source of surplus value in production. In Marxist terms, this causes a fall in the composition of capital. In simpler terms, this means a reduction in the amount of labor available for exploitation, less surplus value overall. Given several constants in the math, this means there can be a fall in the rate of profit, a tendency, if you will. See what Marx did there? And that this is an observable trait in the economy. Marx, being the brilliant man that he was, also knows the existence of several counter-tendencies to this, which can either slow or even completely reverse this fall in the rate of profit. Now, that's all well and good, and we'll get into those counter-tendencies in just a moment. But what are the political consequences of Marx's presentation? Well, if the capitalist system has an inbuilt tendency to reduce the rate of profit, the very core of capitalism, without which it cannot exist, then that basically means capitalism has an inbuilt self-destruct, in which a point is reached with which it no longer remains viable to run economies on a capitalist basis. Consequently, too, this means that higher and higher productivity and efficiency is counterproductive in the long run to the aims of the system. This is a major contradiction within capitalism, and not the only one at that. From the dozens out there, this is my personal favorite. This is also not mentioning that increased automation means less consumers with disposable income, and as a result, reduced profits as those same people you laid off in order to get the machines working in their place can't even buy the stuff those machines make because they no longer have stable income. That's why UBI discussions have taken off as of late, and many of the proponents are incredibly wealthy business types. I made a video looking into this further here. Side note, as a result of all this, there is a drive to massively increase commodity production in order to raise the rate of profit. In yet another paradoxical turn, this leads to crises of overproduction, one of the many reasons for the cyclical crises that plague capitalism. To quote Richard Wolff, if you had a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out a long time ago. This, too, drives imperialism, which attempts to solve these issues while simultaneously creating the conditions for further contradictions down the line. It's a long conversation, but TLDR, one aspect of imperialism is capital investment in foreign countries. This leads to organized labor practices, increasing militancy, and the unintended consequence of improving local conditions to a degree, thus increasing labor costs, making labor less exploitable. Via the hand of unfair trade agreements, the IMF, World Bank, support of local reactionary powers, and sanctioning amongst many others, attempts are made to control those local economies to maintain this high profitability. This means that no matter what, the fundamental consequences of late-stage capitalism are unequal exchange, value transference, imperialism, and the maintenance by any method the political and economic supremacy of the current capitalist ruling order. Several terms here were mentioned: imperialism, unequal exchange, value transfers, amongst others, that I'll get into in a future video, inshallah. Now, what of the counter-tendencies? Marx and others have noted several things that can either slow down or reverse this tendency. These include more intense exploitation of labor, which could increase the rate of surplus value, either domestic or abroad via differing methods, the cheapening of the elements of constant capital due to the increasing productivity of labor or other means, the deviation of the wage rate from the value of labor power, meaning reduction of wages usually, the existence and increase of overpopulation, reserve army of labor, unemployment, blah blah, the cheapening of industrial inputs, consumer and capital goods through imports, war or other events that result in the destruction or otherwise inoperative rendering of capital, monopolization within mature industries with little new capital investment, amongst many, many more. Interestingly, one of the largest increases in the rate of profit in recent history was World War II, specifically as a result of the wholesale destruction of entire industries because of, well, the war. An interesting yet terrifying idea is that capitalists might feel the need to egg on catastrophic conflict so that the rate of profit can rise. Now, what of the empirical evidence? Well, entire libraries have been written on this topic, but I'll mention a few in passing that you can check out yourself in the further reading section of the pinned comment. Minky Lee, an economist and world system scholar, has researched this globally. Basu and Manolakos have found supporting evidence within the US economy. Several articles looking at the relevant data have found similar trends in the US and UK economy. Similarly, Michael Roberts, too, has found supporting evidence in the UK economy and globally. Finally, Cockshot and Contrell, too, have contributed immensely to this discussion, and Cockshot himself has a fantastic video regarding the fall of rate of profit here. As for rebuttals and answers, well, there are several, but the most popular one was put forth by the Japanese Marxist economist Okishio, in which his argument is, if you have an economy with equalized rates of profit, constant real wages, and the opportunity for balanced growth, then any cost-saving technical change for a capitalist will raise the rate of profit in the economy as a whole. He uses fancy math to prove this, but as far as I've looked into it, the math is sound. However, the fundamental presuppositions, especially regarding the economy he analyzed, Japan, aren't. Modern capitalism doesn't have equalized rates of profit, as, for example, capital-intensive industries, as a general rule, experience lower rates of profit. Japan and most individual economies, too, have not had constant real wages, but instead have shifted either up or down, depending on the situation, meaning the second presupposition is incorrect as well. Finally, by balanced growth, Okishio means equal expansion rate across all industries and equal growth of capital stock and employment. This is a criteria met by very few countries and only for short periods of time, so much so that it renders it too on shaky ground, especially for Japan, the economy in question. Okishio himself has reworked his math and found that if he diverges from his presuppositions, which is what real economies do, you end up with rates of profit converging on 0 to 1%, essentially proving Marx's point. Cockshot himself has made a magnificent video on the topic that you can see here. There are others, but they're more mathematical, boring, and most importantly subject to similar limitations to the above example. There's a reason this little point of Marx has been so controversial for over 100 years. If it were a clear falsehood, it would have been proven as such already. And now for our conclusion. Capitalism sucks, it's time to go beyond. No, really, that's it. Maybe I'll make a video looking into other fun contradictions of capitalism in the future, but for now, that's all for this time. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon, it really does help.